The Galactic Coalition had been recruiting soldiers from across the galaxy for 300 cycles. They searched every known world for the strongest, fastest, and toughest species to serve in their peacekeeping forces. They had warriors made of living stone, soldiers who could breathe fire, and fighters who could see in total darkness. When their scouts finally discovered Earth on the far edge of the spiral arm, they were not impressed at first. Humans were small, soft, and fragile compared to most species in the Coalition. They had no claws, no thick armor, no natural weapons of any kind. But one thing caught the attention of the Coalition scientists. These weak little creatures had somehow spread across their entire planet, living in every climate from burning deserts to frozen wastelands. That was rare. Most species stayed in one type of environment. Humans seemed to ignore such limits. Private First Class Danny Vance never thought he would end up in space. He was 24 years old, a mechanic from a small town in Ohio. He had grown up fixing tractors, cars, and anything else with an engine. When the Coalition announced they were accepting human volunteers, Danny signed up mostly for the money. The pay was good, and they promised adventure. He figured he could handle whatever they threw at him. He had survived Ohio winters. After all, how bad could space be? Now he stood in a massive recruitment hall on Station Orinth, a structure so large it made every building on Earth look like a toy. The ceiling stretched so high above him that clouds actually formed near the top. Around him stood 42 other human volunteers, looking just as nervous and amazed as he felt. But they were not alone. Nearly 200 alien recruits filled the hall, representing a dozen different species from across the galaxy. Danny tried not to stare, but it was hard. The Crethani were impossible to ignore. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, covered in thick brown fur that made them look like giant bears that had learned to walk upright. They came from a jungle world where the temperature never dropped below what humans would call a comfortable summer day. They looked powerful and confident, their deep voices rumbling as they spoke to each other. The Silicans were even stranger. Their bodies appeared to be made of living crystal, and they glowed faintly from within like lamps. They came from a world of volcanic heat, drawing energy directly from warmth, the way plants drew energy from sunlight. Several of them stood together, their inner light pulsing slowly as they observed their surroundings. The Volani made Danny uncomfortable. They were tall and thin, with smooth skin that glistened with moisture. Their large black eyes never seemed to blink. They were amphibians from a water world. And even here in the climate-controlled station, they kept touching their skin nervously, as if checking to make sure it had not dried out. A heavy silence fell over the hall as Commander Thel Vask entered. She was a Valorian, a species that served as officers throughout the Coalition. She stood over 2 meters tall, with scales that shimmered between blue and green as she moved. 4 arms extended from her torso, and she used all of them as she walked, gesturing to aides and checking data pads. Her eyes swept across the assembled recruits, with a look that Danny recognized. It was the same look his high school football coach used to give the freshman players. It said that she expected most of them to fail. "You have been selected for survival training," Commander Thel Vask announced. Her voice was deep and harsh, but the translator device made her words clear. "You will be deployed to the planet Nexus 7. This is not a test of combat skill. This is not a test of strength or speed. This is a test of endurance. You will be required to travel 90 kilometers across the surface to reach an extraction point. You will have 12 cycles to complete this journey." She paused, and Danny noticed something flicker across her face. It might have been amusement. It might have been cruelty. He could not tell. "The current surface temperature of Nexus 7, she continued, is negative 87 degrees standard. The reaction was immediate. The Silicans, who had been glowing confidently, suddenly dimmed. Their crystalline bodies were designed to absorb heat, not survive without it. Negative 87 degrees would drain them like batteries left in a freezer. The Crethani shifted uneasily, their fur suddenly seeming much less impressive. Jungle creatures had no experience with such cold. The Volani looked at each other with something close to panic. Their moist skin would freeze solid in minutes. Danny felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Corporal Maria Delgado standing beside him. She was a few years older than him, with sharp eyes and short dark hair. She came from Texas and had been a survival instructor before joining the Coalition program. They had become friends during the long journey to Station Orinth. -87, she said quietly. That is cold, but not impossible. Earth has recorded temperatures lower than that. Danny nodded. He remembered reading about Antarctica, where temperatures could drop below -100 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists had lived and worked there for decades. It was brutal, but humans had figured out how to handle it. He looked around at the alien recruits again. The Krethani were still shifting nervously. The Silicans had dimmed even further. The Volani looked ready to withdraw from the training entirely. None of them had ever experienced cold like that. Their worlds had never demanded it of them, but Earth had. Earth was a planet of extremes. Humans had crossed ice ages. They had settled the Arctic. They had climbed the highest frozen mountains and survived winters that lasted months. They had done it without fur, without scales, without any natural protection at all. They had done it with their minds. Danny felt something strange growing in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as confidence. He was not the strongest person in this room. He was not the fastest or the toughest, but he came from a world that taught its children how to build fires, how to make shelters, how to turn hostile environments into homes. Commander Thelvask was still speaking, explaining the rules and the equipment that would be provided. Danny listened carefully, but his mind was already working on the problem. 90 kilometers in 12 cycles, -87 degrees, standard equipment designed for species that had never faced real cold. It would not be easy. Many would fail. But Danny had spent his whole life fixing things that were broken and making things work when they should not. This was just another problem to solve. He caught Maria's eye and saw the same determination reflected there. Whatever was coming, they would face it the way humans always faced impossible situations. They would adapt. They would build. They would survive. The transport ships were already warming up in the docking bay. In a few hours, they would be on Nexus 7, surrounded by a frozen wasteland that wanted to kill them. Danny took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. He was ready. The transport ship shook violently as it descended through the atmosphere of Nexus 7. Danny gripped the safety harness and watched through the small viewport as the world below came into view. It was white. Everything was white. An endless ocean of ice and snow stretched to every horizon, broken only by mountain ranges that rose like frozen teeth against a pale gray sky. The wind was visible even from this height, streaming ribbons of snow that raced across the surface like ghosts fleeing from something terrible. Private Luis Garza sat across from Danny, his face pressed against his own viewport. He was young, barely 20, from a town in Arizona where the temperature rarely dropped below freezing. His hands were already shaking, and they had not even landed yet. "This is crazy," Luis said. "Nobody can survive down there. Look at it. There is nothing but ice." "People have survived worse," Danny replied, though he was not entirely sure that was true. "Antarctica gets almost this cold. Scientists live there, scientists with heated buildings and supply planes." Luis shot back. "We have standard survival packs." That is it. He had a point. Danny had examined his survival pack during the journey. It contained emergency rations designed to last 12 cycles, if eaten sparingly. A thermal blanket, made of reflective material, a locator beacon, and a small power cell connected to the heating element built into their suits. The power cell was designed to last the full 12 cycles, but only if it was used at minimum output. Danny had done the math in his head. Minimum output would keep them from freezing solid, but it would not keep them warm. It would just slow down the dying. The transport touched down hard, throwing everyone against their harnesses. Outside the viewport, Danny could see nothing but swirling white. The wind screamed against the hull like a living thing trying to get inside. Commander Thelvask's voice crackled through the speakers. "Standard equipment has been distributed. The extraction point is 90 kilometers north. You have 12 cycles. Those who arrive will continue their training. Those who do not will be extracted by medical drones if they activate their emergency beacons." She paused. The coalition thanks you for your service. The rear ramp began to lower. Danny had experienced cold before. He had walked to school through Ohio blizzards. He had fixed engines in barns with no heating while the wind howled outside. He thought he understood cold. He was wrong. The air that rushed into the transport was not just cold, it was aggressive. It bit into exposed skin like thousands of tiny knives. It burned the inside of his nose and throat with every breath. Frost formed on his face mask almost instantly, and he had to wipe it away just to see. The temperature was beyond anything Earth had prepared him for. This was not weather. This was a weapon. Around him, recruits stumbled down the ramp into the white nightmare. The Crethani went first, their massive bodies moving with confidence. That confidence lasted about 30 seconds. Danny watched as the giant fur-covered warriors began to shiver. Their jungle biology had never developed defenses against this kind of assault. Their fur, so effective at releasing heat in humid environments, did almost nothing to trap warmth. Within minutes, their movements became sluggish. Their deep voices grew quiet. The silicons were even worse. Their crystalline bodies, designed to absorb and store heat from volcanic environments, had no heat to absorb here. Danny watched two of them step off the ramp and simply stop moving. Their inner glow, which had pulsed so confidently back on the station, flickered like candles in a storm. Then, it went out entirely. Medical drones descended from the transport, collected their motionless forms, and carried them back inside. They were not dead, but they were finished. The exercise was over for them before it had truly begun. The Volani tried to huddle together for warmth, but their moist amphibian skin was already cracking in the dry, frozen air. Danny heard sounds of pain from their group, sounds that needed no translation. One by one, they activated their emergency beacons and were extracted. Maria appeared beside Danny, her face hidden behind a thermal mask. "We need to move," she shouted over the wind. "Standing still means death. Body heat escapes faster when you are not generating more." She was right. Danny had learned that lesson years ago, helping his father dig out their driveway after a heavy snowfall. Keep moving. Keep working. Keep the blood flowing. He gathered the human recruits around him. 43 had landed on the surface. All 43 were still standing. The cold hurt, but none of them had collapsed. None of them had given up. "Listen to me," Danny shouted. "We move in groups. Stay close together. Break the wind for each other. Take turns leading so nobody gets too tired. Check the person next to you every few minutes. Watch for signs of frostbite. Watch for confusion. If someone starts acting strange, stop and help them." "Who put you in charge?" someone called out. "Nobody," Danny admitted. "But I know how to survive cold, and right now, that is what matters. Anyone who has a better idea, speak up." Nobody spoke. Danny nodded and pointed north, toward the extraction point 90 kilometers away. "Then let us go, one step at a time. We can do this." They began to march. The first hour was brutal. The wind never stopped. It pushed against them constantly, stealing heat with every gust. Snow got into every gap in their clothing, melting against their skin and then freezing again. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and they had to hold on to each other just to stay together. But they kept moving. Behind them, more and more alien recruits fell. The Crethani warriors, so proud and strong, collapsed into the snow one after another. Their vital signs flickered on their emergency transponders, and the drones swept in to collect them. The Tarvoks, reptilian soldiers from a volcanic world, grew slower and slower as their cold-blooded bodies failed to generate heat. They curled up in the snow, their eyes going dull, and had to be extracted before they froze solid. By the end of the first day, half of the original recruits were gone. Danny called a halt when the light began to fade. They had covered almost 20 kilometers, a good pace considering the conditions. He organized the humans into small clusters, showing them how to dig shallow pits in the snow and cover them with thermal blankets to create crude shelters. It was a technique he had read about in a book on Arctic survival. Snow was actually a good insulator if you used it right. Maria helped him demonstrate how to share body heat without losing too much to the environment. They packed in tight, conserving warmth through proximity. It was uncomfortable, but it worked. The temperature in their little snow shelters rose to something almost bearable. Outside, the wind screamed through the darkness. Somewhere in the distance, Danny heard the whine of more medical drones collecting more fallen recruits. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would be harder. The cold would not let up. Their supplies would run lower. More aliens would fall, but the humans would keep moving. They had no choice. This was what they were built for. Not strength or speed or natural armor. Humans were built to endure, to adapt, to refuse to give up even when everything said they should. Danny dreamed of fire. Warm, beautiful fire. And somehow, despite everything, he smiled. The second day began with death. Not human death, not yet, but death all the same. Danny woke to the sound of medical drones buzzing overhead, their mechanical arms reaching down to collect bodies from the snow. He counted 7 Krithani being loaded onto transport sleds, their massive forms limp and still. Their fur was covered in ice crystals that sparkled in the pale morning light. 2 more silicons lay nearby, their crystalline bodies dark and cold, no longer glowing with inner light. A group of Volani had frozen together during the night, their amphibian bodies locked in a final desperate embrace. Danny looked away and focused on his own people. The humans had survived the night. All 43 of them were still breathing, still moving, still alive. Some had frostbite on their fingers and toes. A few were coughing from the cold air that had burned their lungs, but they were alive. Maria was already up, checking on the others. She moved through the camp with purpose, examining hands and feet, asking questions about pain and sensation. Her medical training showed in every careful movement. "We lost nobody," she reported when she reached Danny. "But we have problems. 6 people have early frostbite, 2 more are showing signs of hypothermia, and we are burning through calories too fast." "The standard rations are not enough for this cold," Danny nodded. He had expected as much. The human body was a furnace that burned food for fuel. And in extreme cold, that furnace had to work overtime. The rations provided by the coalition were designed for average conditions, not for -87 degrees with constant wind. "How far to the extraction point?" he asked. "About 70 kilometers. We covered good distance yesterday, but the terrain gets worse ahead. Mountains, 70 kilometers. They had 10 cycles left to cover it. That should have been easy under normal conditions. But nothing about this was normal. The cold was getting worse as they moved north. Not better. The wind was picking up, and they were all getting weaker." Danny gathered the survivors together. Human and alien alike, they huddled in a rough circle, trying to share what little warmth they had. He counted quickly. 43 humans, 8 aliens who had somehow made it through the night. That was all that remained of the 243 recruits who had started this exercise. "We need to keep moving," Danny said. "I know everyone is tired. I know you are cold and hungry and scared. But stopping is death. We have to reach the extraction point. There is no other option." A Krethani named Vorth spoke up. He was the largest of his kind still standing, but even he looked diminished. His fur was matted with ice, and his great hands trembled constantly. "My people cannot continue," he said. His translator, turning his rumbling voice into flat words. "We are not made for this cold. Every step is agony." "Then we help you," Danny said simply. "Humans will take turns walking beside you. We will share our body heat when we rest. We will slow our pace if we have to. But we do not leave anyone behind." Vorth stared at him with eyes that held something between gratitude and disbelief. "Why would you do this?" "We are not your people." Danny thought about the question. He thought about Earth, about all the times humans had helped strangers survive disasters and wars and terrible conditions. He thought about his father, who had once driven 3 hours through a blizzard to bring medicine to a neighbor he barely knew. "Because that is what humans do," he said finally. "We take care of each other. All of us. That is how we survived on our world." They began to march again. The terrain grew worse as Maria had warned. The flat ice fields gave way to broken ground, ridges and valleys that forced them to climb up and down constantly. The wind channeled through the valleys, creating blasts of cold that nearly knocked people off their feet. Snow had begun to fall again, thick and heavy, reducing visibility to almost nothing. More aliens fell throughout the day. A Tarvox warrior, his reptilian body unable to generate enough heat, simply sat down in the snow and refused to move. Danny tried to help him up, tried to get him walking again, but the Tarvox's eyes were already glazing over. The cold had slowed his metabolism to nearly nothing. His brain was shutting down. "Leave me," the Tarvox said, his voice barely a whisper. "I am finished. Save yourselves." Danny wanted to argue, but Maria pulled him away. "He is too far gone," she said quietly. "His core temperature has dropped too much. Even if we carried him, he would not survive. The best thing we can do is let the drones take him." The medical drone arrived moments later, wrapping the Tarvox in a thermal cocoon and lifting him toward a transport. Danny watched until the drone disappeared into the snow, then turned and kept walking. By midday, only 4 aliens remained with the humans: Vorth the Krethani, a Valorian named Krestak, who seemed to be handling the cold better than most of his kind; 2 Silicans who had somehow managed to keep their inner glow burning, though it was faint and flickering; and the humans. All 43 of them still walked. Some limped, some leaned on others for support, but they walked. Maria fell into step beside Danny as they climbed another ridge. "How are you doing this?" she asked. "The aliens are dying all around us, but you just keep going. You keep helping everyone. Where does that strength come from?" Danny did not answer right away. He thought about his grandfather, who had fought in a war and walked across frozen mountains to escape enemy territory. He thought about his mother, who had worked 2 jobs through every winter to keep food on the table. He thought about all the humans throughout history who had faced impossible odds and refused to quit. "I do not know if it is strength," he said at last. "Maybe it is stubbornness. Or maybe it is something else. On Earth, the cold kills more people than almost anything else. We have been fighting it for thousands of years. Maybe that fight is part of who we are now. We do not know how to stop." They reached the top of the ridge and looked out at what lay ahead. More ice, more mountains, more wind and snow and deadly cold stretching to the horizon. Behind them, another medical drone whined as it collected another fallen alien. Danny took a deep breath of freezing air and started down the other side of the ridge. Maria followed. The humans followed. The 4 remaining aliens followed. They had 60 kilometers left to go. The cold was their enemy, and it was winning. But it had not won yet. Danny thought about fire again. Not natural fire, but the fire that burned inside humans. The fire that kept them moving when their bodies screamed for rest. The fire that made them help strangers even when they could barely help themselves. That fire was still burning. As long as it burned, they had a chance. He just had to find a way to make it burn brighter. The idea came to Danny on the 3rd night, when he was so cold he could barely think. They had made camp in the shadow of a great ice cliff, using the frozen wall to block the worst of the wind. The humans huddled together in their groups, sharing body heat and trying to sleep. The 4 remaining aliens had been given spots in the center of the largest group, where the warmth was greatest. It was not much, but it was something. Danny could not sleep. His mind kept turning over the same problem again and again. They had about 50 kilometers left to travel. They had 7 cycles to do it. Under normal conditions, that would be easy, but the cold was draining them faster than they could recover. The rations were not enough. The heating elements in their suits were not enough. At this rate, even the humans would start falling soon. He pulled out his survival pack and stared at the small power cell that powered his suit's heating element. It was designed to last 12 cycles at minimum output. That meant it could produce much more heat than it was currently producing. The coalition had limited the output to make the battery last, not because the cell could not handle more power. Danny was a mechanic. He had spent his whole life making machines do things they were not designed to do. He began to take apart his survival pack. Maria found him an hour later, surrounded by components and wiring. She crouched beside him, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "What are you doing?" "Solving a problem," Danny said without looking up. His fingers were numb and clumsy, but he kept working. The coalition designed this equipment for average conditions. Average temperature, average distance, average recruits, but we are not in average conditions, so I am changing the design. Maria watched as he rewired the heating element to draw more power from the cell. She was smart enough to see what he was doing immediately. If you increase the output, the battery will drain faster. You will be warm for a day, then you will have nothing. That is true if I only use my own cell, Danny agreed. But look around us. How many recruits have been extracted so far? Maria's eyes widened as she understood. They left their equipment behind. Exactly. Every recruit who fell left a survival pack in the snow. Most of them are still out there, buried but not destroyed. If we collect those packs, we will have dozens of power cells, maybe hundreds. But how does that help? Each person can only wear one heating element. Danny smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since they landed on this frozen planet. We do not use individual heating elements. We build one big heater. Central heating. Like the furnaces in houses back on Earth. He explained his idea as he worked. Instead of each person carrying their own weak heat source, they would combine multiple power cells into a single powerful unit. They would build a container to hold the heat, insulated with snow and reflective material from the thermal blankets. They would mount it on a sled that they could drag behind them. Everyone would take turns walking close to the sled, warming up before rotating back to the edges of the group. Maria stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. It was a small, tired laugh. But it was genuine. That is either brilliant or insane. On Earth, we call that engineering, Danny said. By morning, the whole camp was awake and working. Danny had explained his plan to everyone, and the response had been overwhelming. The humans immediately understood what he was trying to do. Many of them had grown up in cold climates, and the idea of central heating was as natural as breathing. Sofia Reyes, a young woman from California who had studied engineering before joining the coalition, became Danny's right hand. She understood electrical systems even better than he did, and she quickly figured out how to link multiple power cells together without causing shorts or overloads. She worked with hands that shook from cold but never stopped moving. Luis Garza led teams back along their trail, digging through the snow to find abandoned survival packs. They found dozens of them, scattered across the frozen landscape like buried treasure. Each pack contained a power cell, a thermal blanket, and rations. The rations alone would help extend their food supply. The power cells would save their lives. Even the aliens helped. Vorth the Krethani used his massive strength to drag heavy components through the snow. Krestak, the Valorian, who had some technical training, helped Sophia with the wiring. The two silicons, their inner glow still flickering weakly, contributed their own power cells to the project without being asked. This is not standard procedure, Krestak said, as he watched the humans work. The coalition has rules about modifying equipment during exercises. Danny did not pause in his work. Standard procedure was killing everyone. So, we are making a new procedure. But the rules do not matter if you are dead, Danny interrupted. On Earth, we have been breaking rules to survive for thousands of years. We call it progress. By midday, the device was finished. They called it the wagon, though it was really more of a sled. A large metal container, salvaged from transport crates, sat on runners made from bent support struts. Inside the container, 16 power cells were linked together, feeding into a heating element that Sophia had rebuilt from spare parts. The whole thing was wrapped in layer after layer of reflective material, with just enough openings to let the heat radiate outward. Danny connected the final wire and stepped back. Let us see if this works. Sophia activated the power cells. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the container began to hum. A soft orange glow appeared at the openings. Heat began to radiate outward, washing over the gathered recruits like a gentle wave. The effect was immediate. People who had been shivering for days stopped shivering. People who had not felt warmth since they landed on this planet suddenly felt warm. Several humans actually laughed with relief. One of the silicons moved closer to the wagon, and Danny watched as its inner glow grew slightly brighter, fed by the heat it was absorbing. "It works," Maria said softly. "Danny, it actually works." Danny nodded, but he was already thinking about the next problem. "We need to figure out how to move it. Dragging that much weight through snow will slow us down." "I can pull it," Vorth offered. The big Krithani moved to the front of the sled and grabbed the harness that Danny had rigged. "The heat will keep me strong. Let me do this." They set out again that afternoon. The pace was slower than before, but nobody minded. For the first time since they landed, they were not fighting just to stay alive. They were actually making progress. The wagon rolled behind them, radiating heat like a small sun. Recruits rotated through positions near the sled, warming themselves before moving to the outer edges of the group. By the time they stopped for the night, they had covered 15 kilometers. Nobody had fallen. Nobody had needed extraction. For the first time, they were winning. Danny sat near the wagon, letting its heat soak into his frozen body. Maria sat beside him, and for a while, neither of them spoke. "You know what the difference is between humans and most other species?" Maria said finally. Danny shook his head. "Most species adapt to their environment," Maria said. "They evolve to fit where they live. Thick fur for cold places, gills for water, wings for the sky. They become what their world needs them to be." She gestured at the wagon. "Humans do the opposite. We change the environment to fit us. We do not grow fur. We make coats. We do not evolve gills. We build ships. We do not become part of the world. We remake the world into something we can survive in." Danny thought about that. He thought about houses and cars and cities and all the other things humans had built to push back against nature. He thought about fire, the first and greatest human invention. "We do not conquer cold by becoming cold," he said slowly. "We conquer cold by making heat." Maria smiled. "Exactly. Outside their circle of warmth, the wind still howled, and the temperature still dropped, and the frozen wasteland still waited to kill them. But inside the circle, sitting near their impossible homemade furnace, the survivors of Nexus 7 were warm, and they were getting closer to the extraction point with every passing hour. They saw the extraction point on the morning of the 10th cycle. It appeared through the blowing snow like a dream, a cluster of buildings and lights rising from the frozen landscape. The coalition flag flew from a tall pole at the center of the compound, its colors barely visible through the white haze. Heat shimmer rose from the buildings, promising warmth and safety, and the end of their long march. Danny stood at the front of the group and stared at those distant buildings. His legs ached from days of walking. His face was raw from wind and cold despite the protection of his mask. His fingers and toes had gone numb so many times that he had lost count. But he was alive. They were all alive. He turned to look at the survivors who had made it this far. 39 humans stood behind him, gaunt and tired but still standing. Their faces showed exhaustion, but their eyes showed something else: pride, determination, the satisfaction of having done something impossible. 4 aliens had survived as well. Vorth the Krithani stood beside the wagon he had pulled for days, his massive form covered in ice, but his spirit unbroken. Krestak the Valorian stood straight despite the cold that had killed so many of his kind. The 2 silicons, their inner glow restored by days of warmth from the wagon, actually glowed brighter than they had since the exercise began. 47 survivors out of 243 recruits. 39 of them were human. "We made it," Luis said. His voice cracked with emotion. "I did not think we would, but we made it." "We all made it," Danny corrected. "Everyone who kept walking. everyone who helped someone else when they could barely help themselves, everyone who refused to give up. Everyone who refused to give up. They covered the final kilometers slowly, savoring the victory. The wagon rolled behind them, still radiating heat. A monument to human stubbornness and creativity. Medical drones flew overhead, but they had no one to collect. Everyone still walking would reach the end. Commander Thelvask was waiting at the entrance to the compound. She looked different than Danny remembered. Her scales were dull from the cold, and frost had formed on her uniform. But her eyes were sharp and focused as she watched the survivors approach. All four of her arms were clasped behind her back in what Danny had learned was a Valorian posture of respect. The group stopped in front of her. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The wind howled around them, and snow swirled through the air. But the silence between them was heavier than any storm. Then Commander Thelvask began to speak. "When I was assigned to train human recruits," she said, "I opposed the decision. I told my superiors that humans were too weak, too fragile, too limited to serve in coalition forces. I said that they would fail every test we gave them, and that accepting them was a waste of resources." She paused and looked at the wagon, studying its improvised construction with obvious interest. I was wrong. The admission seemed to cost her something. Valorians were proud, Danny had learned, and admitting mistakes did not come easily to them. "This exercise has been conducted for 300 cycles," Thelvask continued. "Thousands of recruits from dozens of species have attempted it. The success rate averages approximately 20%. Some species do better. Some do worse. But no species has ever done what you did." She pointed at the wagon. "No species has ever modified their equipment during the exercise. No species has ever built supplementary heating. No species has ever changed the conditions of the test to increase their chances of survival." "We did not know we were not supposed to," Danny said. Thelvask made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You were not forbidden. It simply never occurred to anyone that it was possible. The Crethani rely on their fur. The Silicans rely on their heat absorption. The Tarvoks rely on their metabolism. Every species relies on what nature gave them." She looked directly at Danny. "Humans have no natural defenses against cold. No fur, no scales, no special adaptations. So instead of relying on what nature gave you, you created something new. You solved a problem that other species did not even recognize as a problem." She turned to address all the survivors. "The purpose of this exercise is not merely to test endurance. It is to identify leaders. Warriors who can survive are valuable. Warriors who can ensure the survival of others are priceless." Her gaze swept across the group, taking in the humans who had organized themselves into teams, who had shared their warmth with aliens, who had built a machine that saved everyone. "The coalition has long believed that military strength comes from natural advantages," Thelvask said. "The strongest species make the best soldiers. The fastest species make the best scouts. The toughest species make the best defenders. But humans have taught me something different today." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that Danny felt in his bones. "True strength is not what you are born with. True strength is what you build when what you were born with is not enough. Humans are small and soft and fragile, but they are also creative and stubborn and completely unwilling to accept defeat. They do not adapt to hostile environments. They conquer hostile environments by remaking them." She extended one of her arms toward Danny in a gesture of respect. "Private Vance, your actions during this exercise have demonstrated leadership qualities that the Coalition desperately needs. You will be promoted to the rank of sergeant and assigned to lead a mixed-species survival training unit." Danny blinked in surprise. "Me? I am just a mechanic." "You were a mechanic," Thelvask corrected. "Now you are a teacher. You will show other species what humans can do. You will teach them to think like humans, to build like humans, to refuse defeat like humans." She looked at the other survivors. "All of you have earned your place in coalition forces. But more importantly, You have earned the respect of every species that will hear this story, and they will all hear it. I will make certain of that." The compound doors opened, and warm air rushed out to greet them. Danny felt that warmth wash over him like a blessing, melting the ice that had formed on his clothes and skin. Behind him, the other survivors began to move toward the entrance, eager to escape the cold at last. But Danny paused for one last look at the frozen wasteland of Nexus 7. The wind still howled, the snow still fell, the temperature was still -87 degrees, cold enough to kill most living things in minutes. It was a hostile, merciless environment that wanted nothing more than to freeze everything that dared to challenge it. And they had beaten it, not with strength or speed or natural adaptations. They had beaten it with fire, with creativity, with the simple human refusal to accept that some problems could not be solved. Danny thought about Earth, about all the frozen mountains and icy tundras and deadly winters that humans had conquered over thousands of years. They had done it the same way, not by becoming cold, but by creating warmth, not by accepting limits, but by breaking them. He looked at the wagon one last time, at the improvised heater that had saved 47 lives. It was ugly and crude, held together with salvaged parts and desperation. But it worked. It had done what nothing else could do. It had kept them alive when everything said they should be dead. That was the human way. When the world tried to kill you, you built something to fight back. Danny smiled and walked into the warmth of the compound. Behind him, the survivors of Nexus 7 followed. They had arrived as recruits, uncertain and untested. They left as something more. They left as proof that humanity belonged among the stars, and somewhere in the frozen wasteland, abandoned but not forgotten. The wagon sat cooling in the snow, a monument to human stubbornness. A reminder that no matter how cold the universe became, humans would always find a way to make fire. They would always find a way to conquer the cold.